About this time last year, Tony Abbott met with the Prime Minister of Japan, shook hands and agreed to have the submarines built by Japan in Japan. Just before Christmas, Joe Hockey said there isn't time to have a proper competitive tender. Tony Abbott, in a desperate bid to secure South Australian Liberal members' votes, promised Shaun Edwards an open competitive tender. Yet just yesterday, both in the Senate and on television, the Finance Minister said, no, that's not right. There's no change. We're going to have a competitive evaluation process. If you ask anybody in the defence industry what that means, they just shake their head and look at the floor.
This competitive evaluation process is something quite unknown to people within defence, those involved in defence procurement. I think it's a bit of a crock myself. The government made a very clear commitment in opposition that the subs would be built in Australia. My fear is that the PM has made a handshake deal with Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and is now backfilling to do that. Now, this commitment to a competitive evaluation process is basically a commitment to do nothing. It has more wriggle room in it than you'd find in a worm farm.
It's not a tender process. It's not a tender process, as Shaun Edwards has said.
What I'm saying is, and I'll...
Well, just a yes or no, is it a tender process or not?
Sorry, I will use the words I choose to use. What we are doing is a competitive evaluation process. We have to evaluate this. We have to do it in a way which is methodical, cautious, that is a process that goes forward in the future, and obviously there has to be a competitive element to that.
But it's not a tender. It's not a tender process, Minister.
It is a competitive evaluation process. I'm not going to get into all sorts of definitions and what's a definition and what of that is. I'm saying, as the Australian Defence Minister, this is the approach that we are taking.
Pork barrelling, is not the answer, and I think the Prime Minister knows that. Look, and in the case of the submarines, it was clear that we were moving towards a competitive tender process, and that was announced at a particular time for obvious reasons. But I think we were heading in that direction anyway.
Liberal Senator Shaun Edwards said in relation to the future submarines project, "I'm very pleased with the decision of the Prime Minister that now commits the government to a full and open tender." Did the Prime Minister start the week promising South Australian backbenchers a full and open tender, or is this just another case of the Prime Minister lying to obtain a vote?
The question in its current form is out of order. You'll remove that unparliamentary term.
Senator Shaun Edwards has said that the Prime Minister
We're familiar with that bit.
I beg your pardon?
It's the last bit where the offence is.
Oh, OK. Did the Prime Minister start the week promising South Australian backbenchers a full and open tender, or is this just another case of the Prime Minister misleading people to get a vote?
Misleading is also unparliamentary term. Try again.
Is this just... I'll let one more go. I appreciate...
Have generously given the Leader of the Opposition another opportunity to rephrase his question, and he's made another mistake. He should not be given a third chance. Clearly Labor are simply trying to make a political point. I believe the question should be ruled out of order.
The Leader of the House is making a very persuasive point. However, on this occasion I will give the Leader of the Opposition one more opportunity, but this applies for all questions.
With regard to what Senator Shaun Edwards said about a full and open tender, did the Prime Minister start the week promising South Australian backbenchers a full and open tender, or is this just another case of the Prime Minister being tricky to obtain a vote?
The question is out of order.